Hey y'all, welcome back to another video. My name is Brooke and today we're going to talk about transplanting tomatoes. Now in this video, I am transplanting my huge micro tomatoes. I know what I just said there. They're not technically huge. They're almost full-size micro tomatoes and I'm actually potting them up into bigger pots because I feel that the first ones that I put them in were too small. So I understand that a lot of you are going to be moving your seedlings into maybe bigger pots or even outside. So today I'm going to talk about some tips that I've learned to help avoid that transplant shock and get them nice and healthy. So a few hours prior to transplanting, make sure that you've watered your plants. This will help keep the soil intact when you're getting them out. And then another thing I learned, but this is an unpopular opinion, when you are transplanting something, now this doesn't apply to all plants, but it is going to apply to tomatoes, you actually want to break apart the soil and the roots with your hands. Yes, you want to break apart the soil and the roots with your hands. You do not want to keep them completely intact. Now, I'm not talking about like ripping the roots off the plant or anything, just gently pressing on that soil brick, loosening everything up, and then by the time that you're done, most of the soil may have fallen off, but the roots will be straight instead of wrapped around. And that's what you want. A lot of times people will transplant them still wrapped around, and this is actually a cycle that you do not want to let your tomatoes or other plants continue, because they'll just continue to circle around in the pot when you actually want them to grow down. Especially when you're transplanting them into bigger pots, they don't really need to go around. They can go down now. So you've seen that I've done that here with my plants, and I highly encourage you to do it with yours, whether you're moving them up into bigger pots or outside. That's a trick that I learned when I was taking the Texas Master Gardener class, and I also encourage doing it with trees, especially when you're transplanting trees outside, and bushes, as well as some other crops, but I'm not going to get into the entire list. I definitely wouldn't recommend it with plants that are highly sensitive to transplanting. My next tip, and this is for if you're just potting something up, not actually putting it outside, is that you want to choose a container 2 to 3 times the size of the container that it was in before. So I sort of tried to estimate that as best as I could with mine. I am slightly limited on how many pots I have right now because of starting all these plants. Now here I actually did switch to, I needed to pot up a mulberry, but we are still talking about tomatoes here. And you can also see I'm doing the exact same thing with the roots on that as well. Another thing about tomatoes that's really important is that some people do not realize that the entire stem of the tomato will root. So you actually want to plant this as deep as possible, whereas with other plants, you actually don't want to plant the stem under the soil. With tomatoes, especially if you have big ones like mine that I showed in the video, you can actually remove some of those leaves, but you want to plant it as deep as possible. Get that stem under as deep as possible because that entire stem will root. And this also means that if you have bigger plants, that you can take cuttings off of them and pot them up as well with the stems underneath, because those stems will root. And you can see I did that with a small branch here. I'm not sure if that one's gonna root. It was very small and it only has a few leaves, but we'll see what happens. Now, if you're getting ready to move your transplants outside, I highly recommend hardening them off, which means that you let them spend a little bit more time, and then the next day a little bit more time, and then the next day a little bit more time outside, exposing them to more sunlight, exposing them to harsher temperatures, and helping them prepare for that outside environment. Because inside they've been cared for, they've been on a heat mat probably under a grow light, and they've been babied a little bit, and so you definitely want to harden them off prior to putting them outside. And this process can take a week or more, so just keep that in mind. Lastly, I do like to feed my plants right after transplanting. I know not everyone agrees with that, but that's something that I like to do. So for my inside tomatoes, I decided to give them some worm castings. Our soil is already pretty nutrient dense, but I figured the worm castings will give them a nice boost. It's not as easy to overfeed when using worm castings. Unlike other fertilizers, you can easily overfeed and cause root burn, whereas worm castings, they're more like a slow release, and it's much harder to overfeed on those. And then finally, you just want to give them a good watering and then go back to their care as usual. You may want to give them a little less direct sunlight if they are getting direct sun, just to minimize their stress. So I hope that this was helpful for you. Please go ahead and give this video a like, share it out with other tomato growers you know, and subscribe. Leave a comment if there's any tips you'd like to share about transplanting tomatoes.